Guys, you are going to like this one. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Western Huntsman podcast. This is Jim Huntsman, your host, coming at you from the Broken Time studio right here in Clark Fork, Idaho. Got a really good one lined up for you guys this week. Really excited about this guest. It's somebody I've wanted to have on the show for a very long time. He happens to be one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite outdoor writers. He's a guy that just has a wealth of information and a ton of applicable experiences to the topic we're going to be talking about, which is going to be centered mainly around public lands and the history of public lands and sometimes the lack of focus that we sometimes get into as to like the fragility of public land and how important it is to us as outdoorsmen and as hunters and anglers and everything else that we do that fuels us in these 11 western states particularly. And I'm really happy to have him on. Hal, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, Jim. Thanks for having me, man.
Man,
this is awesome.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I meant what I said. You're one of my. By the way, guys, Hal Herring. For those of you that don't know, I'll have him introduce himself here in just a second. So I noticed I didn't say your last name, but I really meant it when I said you're one of my favorite writers. I really like the way you write, the way you can articulate. You're just you're a magician with these, and you're a wordsmith, and I really like the way you put everything together because you have a way to simplify very complicated things and tackle very complicated topics, but make it in a way that like dumb dudes like me can understand, and I really like that, so I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that too. I work hard at it. But I do draw on, it's been my life, outdoors. It's a passion of mine in the first place that I think I bring it, that I carry with me when I'm working on writing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And where did that come about? Because the thing that always interests me with you, Hal, is you're from Alabama, right? Which is not particularly known for its vast public lands.
Correct.
Such as we have out west, and I'm fairly familiar with Alabama. I lived in North Carolina when I was in the military for a long time, and I think there was a lot of similarities. And in fact, I got a crazy story. Here, you know what I think about when I think of Alabama?
Tell me.
I had this buddy of mine. We hung out, and he was from Alabama, so we're stationed both together in North Carolina there. And he's from Alabama, and I always knew he was a little crazy. And we go, I don't remember where we were going, but it just so happened we're by this field off base somewhere hanging out I had this Ford Ranger, and he's in the passenger seat. And it's nighttime, and it's dark out, and my headlights spot some white-tailed deer in this field. And I just, we're young, probably 20, 21 years old, somewhere around there, young and dumb, and Marines, have big egos that they need to fulfill or whatever. So I turned the truck into this field, and with the goal of chasing these deer. Well, he had a different goal in mind because I got up next to one, and they were running, and I'm tearing off through this field. I've got the truck in 4-wheel drive, mud's flying, and all of a sudden, this dude, his last name I don't even remember his first name. His last name is Sanders, and Sanders all of a sudden rolls down the window and jumps out of the truck and onto the back of this doe. And she bucked him off like it was the worst rodeo buck off I've ever seen. He goes flying one direction, the doe kind of rolls on the ground, jumps back up and runs off, and I slam on the brakes, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? He just jumped out of my truck. So when I think of Alabama, that's always what I think about. Are you crazy like that guy?
I doubt I would be well, in my youth, I might have jumped out of trucks. Nowadays, I go along with the idea that the ground gets harder and harder every year until it opens up and lets you in.
God, you're not kidding, man. The ground hurts a lot more nowadays.
It was a good place to grow up, though, and I stayed there until I think I was 25 when I moved west. But it was a great. I mean, I hunted so much ever since I was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky that my folks they bought a place. My father never liked living in town, and they got a place that way out when I was about 12. And so I grew up free and really fishing and hunting. I mean, that was my main focus as a kid, as it's same as than now.
Do you ever get back to Alabama and hunt at all?
I do. I don't hunt very much. My nephew is on our old place down there, deer hunting, and has invited me this year if I can get there. I don't know if I can. But I don't hunt down there much, but I certainly fish.
Yeah.
And I go back whenever I can. I will go back. I've got family there.
Yeah.
And I've got a good friend in Mississippi who has a boat, and we still fish all that. I still love. I've never gotten over fishing the tailwaters of like Guntersville Dam, Wheeler Dam, Pickwick on the Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
I still am. I would go do that right now.
Yeah, that'd be a ball. I'd go with
you.
It's
super fun. You never know what you're going to catch.
Yeah.
The fishing's good.
That's the thing about the South too, is you nailed it. You really never know what you're going to catch. That's where I was introduced to alligator gar. And I caught this sucker. I was trying to bass fish, and I caught this alligator gar. I'd never seen one, never even heard of one, and pulled this thing up, and he tore up my net.
Yeah, yeah. And that was something like when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10. I read something like in Outdoor Life or Field and Stream about using a piece of like pantyhose, like that you put on the back of your lure.
Uh huh.
And when a gar hits it, they'll tangle, and you can get them hooked, you know.
Oh, interesting.
And I tried that a lot, and I caught a couple. They weren't alligator gar; they were short nose or spotted gar.
Uh huh. Yep.
But I was able to catch them using that trick that I got. It might even have been in that. Remember, Sports Afield used to have that almanac in the middle.
Oh yeah.
And they had all these cool like tips, but that was in the swamps along the Tennessee River out of Huntsville, Alabama.
Wow.
And you could really catch some weird stuff in there as well. Like the river drum, like freshwater drum would move up in there. You never knew what was coming. Bowfin.
Yep.
Which people call grinnell down there. But yeah.
So
it was good.
Yeah, heck yeah. I love the South. When I moved as a kid, because I grew up out in down in Utah, and from a kid from Utah out west, you know, my family, we spent a lot of time in Utah, Colorado, you know, Wyoming, Idaho.
All good
stuff, you know, and all this different Western landscape that I was so used to. And then the Marine sends me out to North Carolina, and there's no mountains out in coastal North Carolina. You know,
so you were at Camp Lejeune.
I was. Yep. You nailed it.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yep. So we'd fish, I can't remember the name of that river coming out of Pollexville. But it was really good for bass and, you know, New River and all these different areas.
Oh,
but it was a culture shock, but the South grows on you. And so there's some things that I miss about it, but, now you're in Montana.
I have been for, I think 34 years. I'm starting to date myself. And I had done, like, speaking of day, I worked on the Gulf Coast too, in commercial fishing, like when I was 20, 21.
Mm-hmm.
And I was back there, and I went to this commercial fishing museum in Destin, Florida. It's really cool.
Oh, man.
And one of the boats that I'd worked on there was a big picture of it, you know, on the wall. And I told the lady, I said, I worked on that boat in 1985, I think. And she said, would you come in for interviews and all? And I thought they were going to stuff me and put me as an exhibit. And it made me feel like I was the ancient, like you're so old that
pay a quarter in the machine and you can see this old dinosaur over here that used to work on that boat.
He used to be on that boat. Look, we got him. We caught him.
So the question I was going for earlier, and you'll see as we go along through this conversation, I get sidetracked very easily.
That's fine. Yeah,
short attention span. Because you're such an advocate for public land, and you have such a deep in fact, you've got one of the deepest understandings of public lands and how they work and the history of them and what we're facing in terms of obstacles. What got you into that, being a kid from Alabama, translated into such a voice for it?
Well, I have an answer to that one. So I was when I was in college in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, we had kind of an informal. This was before internet, phones, any maps, Onyx, Go Hunt. But we had topo maps of all the available public land, like Talladega National Forest and Bankhead National Forest. The Mulgee Wildlife Management Area down there. We spent so much time on that. Anywhere we could go, we went, Mm-hmm. And so when I started and I moved out west, I had gotten a job managing this little ranch in the Bitterroots. And this first year I was legal, I hiked into the Bitterroots and I killed a bull. And I didn't kill another one for like 6 years. I thought I had the world by the tail,
Yeah.
And I was like going around telling people how to elk hunt. But I lucked into this bull, and I just never got over it. Jim, I like the idea that you could walk from your house to miles and miles where there were elk and mule deer and mountain lions,
Mm-hmm.
And trout, and you could walk to Idaho, and you still wouldn't be on anybody else's land but yours.
Yeah.
And so this was when I was in my 20s, and I was also working then in timber, doing controlled burns, tree planting, all of this, all on federal public land, right?
Yeah.
And so that turned into 27 years more. I'm still doing it, but of contracting or subcontracting public land work. So not only was I, and then raising my kids, not only were we on public land all the time, but a large part of the groceries that came in my house was paid for by public land contract.
Mm.
And so at some point in there, I ran into, I can always tell this story, and it was in 1999, and I was just starting to do outdoor writing, and I ran into a study. This is before the internet now.
Yeah.
I mean, they had internet, but I didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither.
and it said how and why to privatize all federal public lands now. And I read that, and I was like, whoa. And then I started researching, and I had gotten on at Field and Stream as a freelancer, just a stringer. And I started covering public lands issues because I discovered that the whole idea of American public lands had been, it was always in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it has been, since its inception.
Always. And the whole idea that President Harrison in 1891 would have signed the Forest Reserve Act, which kicked the whole thing off,
Mm-hmm.
That was unlikely to the max. Like a lot of people hated the idea of setting anything aside during the closing of the frontier,
Do you think that was from like leftover natural passed down beliefs and just, I don't know, societal norms of the time where, these folks came from other, these were the direct descendants of, their grandpas and great grandfathers were folks from mainly Europe, where there was no concept of public land. I mean, outside of a park in town kind of thing. And the king's deer was to be hunted only by people authorized to do so, and the lack of public land. Yeah. I guess where I want to emphasize is kind of what I told you before we hit record is I feel like there's been this kind of drop in interest and discussion about public land and its fragility since, I don't know, sometime after like COVID started. And I don't know where that comes from. And I think that a lot of people see, like how for me, I had this epiphany moment where, again, I grew up out west. In high school, I spent more time on public land than I did in a public high school. I was constantly in the woods. I can get on a dirt road and go for 4 days and not see another soul. I could hike into the backcountry. I could do all these things. I could hunt. I could camp. I could fish. And my family did that. We spent all our time in national forests camping in remote areas on primitive spots where, you just kind of pull in, set up a tent or set up your trailer, and that's how we spent our summers and fished on the rivers catching brook trout. And then all of a sudden I go out to North Carolina. And when you're in the military, you're able to get a resident license to go hunt deer. And I was pretty excited. I'd never seen a white-tailed deer until I got to North Carolina. Wow! And they're just small out there in coastal North Carolina. They're not much bigger than my golden retriever. I was blown away when you compare it to a big mule deer from Colorado or Utah. Yeah. So, and this is a long way of getting there, but I think it's important because this epiphany moment I think is lacking in a lot of people that grew up out west. I get there. I get this deer tag. I go down to the PX on base, which is kind of like your, get everything store, a Walmart, so to speak, on base. And I put this 30-06 on layaway. And I pay it for a few months and finally probably $250 or so, but, you don't make much in the military, especially 20 some odd years ago. Get the rifle out and I get my deer tag. I'm all excited because for $40 I could shoot 6 deer and a bear and all these turkey and, lots of stuff. And my fishing license was included. I go out and I buy that Ford Ranger that I referenced earlier, and I start driving all over North Carolina. And you know what I found? Nothing but no trespassing signs everywhere. Yeah. I mean, everywhere I went. I bought a map to see if I could find... I didn't even know what they were. I didn't even really reference or know the difference between public land and or national forest or BLM because I just thought that it was like how I grew up everywhere. I didn't realize
bet that was a reality check.
It was Hal. It was like I was in a state of depression over the whole situation. I finally found this little chunk of land, and it's called the Croatan National Forest, not far from base, and it's super small. I mean, I don't even know how many acres it is, but in 2 hours you could be from the south side to the north side in probably under 2 hours, and it wasn't very big, but that's the only chunk of private or public land I could find that was accessible. So the point is I was shocked.
Did you get one?
No, I did get one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it took a lot of work, and I was just shocked at the lack of land that I could go use because I was so used to so much land available to me. And so today we have a lot of hunters out there that I think might not understand the importance and the beauty of our public land system. Can you kind of build upon that and maybe express the importance of it?
Yeah. So what you were experiencing was the fact that, but before you get to the 100th meridian, which cuts the country kind of in half, the Great Plains. Yeah. You got all that rain.
Yes.
And so that land was claimed, it was claimed right between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Mm-hmm. That land was just completely claimed, bought, sold. It was, so it was taken from, the Native Americans either through warfare or trade. And then it was immediately some of the great history that I got into. I'm working on a book on this, and one of them is if you go back to 1783 and you look at the war in Ohio, which was the frontier back then, you can start understanding how all of this kind of unfolds, because that area, Elk River, Canal River, in Ohio and West Virginia and all, that was just one of the most hotly contested places in America. One of the greatest defeats of the U.S. military to this day occurred there at St. Clair's defeat.
Yep.
And so what it was all of that land was so well watered and so valuable that it was claimed by individuals, private enterprise forever, you know. And it wasn't until, I don't want to lecture here, but it wasn't until 1911 with the passage of the Weeks Act that the federal government could purchase land for national forests in the east, like in the south, you know?
Yeah, where it was already gobbled up.
Yes, and like that Croatoan you're talking about. So these lands were abused to the point where all the timber was cut off of them. People had farmed them and lost most of the dirt, like for tobacco. And they were basically abandoned or pennies on the dollar. So the Weeks Act of 1911 allowed the federal government to buy up and create public lands and restore the ecological function of land. Like in Alabama, the Bankhead National Forest had been logged flat and then farmed until, and it's not that good a farmland. It's not the right kind of dirt.
Oh, okay.
And until it was just exhausted and the topsoil was all gone and people had left. And so the federal government could then buy that. It's still very beautiful, you know, and kind of, they restored it, like down south, Conecuh National Forest. That was longleaf pine, and it was logged off flat and then turpentined. And they did everything they could to get money from that land, and then they tried to farm it. It wouldn't farm its sand. So it was abandoned, and under the Weeks Act, the federal government could take it on and create the Conecuh National Forest, which is now a beautiful longleaf pine functioning place, you know. But that land was all so valuable up until they exhausted parts of it. The Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina was logged absolutely flat. And so much topsoil had run off of there, it then caught fire. I mean, it's like you can't believe it. And so much topsoil had run off of there that it filled up the French Broad River, and it made it all flood. And then it made it impossible to navigate. Like the Hudson River has sediment in it from the logging days of the frontier, where it still strands boats.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's called legacy sediment. And so much dirt ran off of those mountains there after they logged it and burned it that it filled up the river. I mean, and this caused huge floods, like the Monongahela River in Pennsylvania, just like whacked out the town, you know. And so people were going like, holy smokes, maybe we shouldn't be doing this to this extent, right?
Yeah.
And once they got west, and people were doing the same thing in the west in these arid landscapes, they said, holy smoke, this is the key to the existence of public land in the west, was watershed protection. That's what the 1891 law was all about.
Okay.
And they said, we have got to protect the headwaters of these rivers in the arid west, or we ain't going to have anybody doing anything down low.
Yeah.
And if you notice, most of the down low is private, and the mountains are the public.
Yep, for sure.
And that's how it started in 1891. And so much of Utah was simply not claimed by anybody because it's a desert. Same with Nevada.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And so if you go to Nevada, I was just down there. My son is working down there. All of the water sources are private. They were homesteaded, and the Homestead Acts didn't come till after the Civil War, right? But the water was homesteaded, and then the desert out there was left in federal hands because nobody wanted it. But if you control the water, of course, nobody could really compete with you for grazing it either.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's some wild. The American history. It ain't never been a country as wild and unlikely as this one. No matter what happens, I just love it.
I'm a history buff.
Yeah.
And so I spend a lot of time I don't know. I don't want to call it wasting time, but
I don't think it is.
It's because it's not. And I think that people that understand historically how things came about are better suited to discuss things that are current. And
that's it. That's the only way.
Yeah. I mean, I get a kick out of some of the discussions, dumb topics like getting rid of Civil War statues because people are offended, but they don't understand the history behind them and how they came about. And so it's an ignorant approach to trying to, erase things that happened. It's okay. It's okay. Like as if I always compare our country to a person. A person never goes through their life without making a mistake, right? Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Correct.
We've all had a black eye one way or the other. And so we're supposed to be okay with that and be okay with each other despite some of the mistakes that were made in the past. And so why keep blackening that eye? And that's kind of what I relate it to.
Yeah, and the other thing is there's never been a country that instituted created the mechanisms by which you can address those problems.
Exactly, yeah.
Like this one. The one time I love Shelby Foote's, history of the Civil War.
Oh, for sure.
And he says in an interview with Ken Burns, he says the one time that we failed to bring everybody to the table and compromise, we killed 620,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
He said most of American history is people working it out. And it may take, from the Emancipation Proclamation of 1862, I think, or whatever, to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It may take 90 to 100 years to get what you got coming to you,
Yeah, absolutely.
But the mechanism is there.
The mechanism is there, and it's such a unique system of solutions are able to come about and be brought forth and actually presented to people that can make decisions on them. There's two great things that came out of the Civil War that people, there's a lot of things that came out of the Civil War, but the two things that really stick out in my mind is and especially these naysayers that say, oh, well, America had slavery. Well, the whole world had slavery, so shut up. There's still slavery in some places in the world. So that's great. We're the only country that shed the blood of over 600,000 people to end slavery. The other thing that came out of that is we're the only country to have fought a civil war, and when that war was decidedly over, both sides shook hands and went home. Not that there was some rough patches along the way afterwards, right? Because there was. But there still are, absolutely. But no other civil war in American history ended by one man signing a piece of paper to another man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they stacked arms and went home and went on about their lives as one country. And
amazing.
It really is. And granted, yes, the city of Vicksburg didn't celebrate Independence Day for 84 years, but they do now, right? They do now. The process is there. And so
the process is there. It's the process is what I'm talking about. And this is absolutely relevant to any discussion of public lands because the institution of the American system of public lands came about because of the black eye, the terrible mistakes that we made in logging. And I'm not talking about sustainable logging. I'm talking about slicking it off until there ain't nothing left everywhere. And so we saw what Roosevelt said was he saw in the pillage and the wasting of America's natural resources a danger to the future soul of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
That we just couldn't be that kind of people. And we were, I got to tell you about a black eye. I think we were the best at wrecking the place that the world had ever seen.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at the bison by 1876, like they were killing the last bison in Miles City, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you go to flash forward to the 1960s. The Cuyahoga River is on fire. 100 years before that, people were catching like seining steelhead out of that thing for, you know.
Gosh, isn't that crazy?
I mean, yeah, but just like you're talking about with the Civil War, it also, if you don't like rough patches, you need to go to another country and live there, or, you know, because there's going to be rough patches.
Yeah, there's going to be rough patches everywhere you go. You know, everybody has a dark history.
This country is wild. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yep.
But we did the same thing. We created the mechanisms to fix land and water and wildlife destruction, and we invented them whole cloth here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I am. People accuse me of being an optimist, you know, and I just say, like, hey, man, based on our track record of wrecking stuff and fixing it, I think optimism is it's okay to be optimistic.
I think it's necessary to have optimism in a lot of these discussions.
And justified. We did it. Like look at the Weeks Act that gave us the national forest east of the Mississippi. You know, look at the Yellowstone National Park. Look at the Bitterroot National Forest, you know, or over there where you are in the cabinets.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just like it's so great you can't believe it that we have these freedoms to roam these lands. And what a choice?
Oh, go ahead. I cut you off.
It was a choice that people made in the United States in 1891 through the 1920s, 30s.
What do you think? What do you see as the opposition to public land? Where does that mentality come from? Like, do you? I mean, I know where it comes from in terms of who the players are. I know, you know, I am a diehard right-wing conservative guy. I'm a constitutional conservative. When it comes to that. However, I get frustrated with my own party because most of this comes from that side, and I don't.
It does.
I think that's. I don't understand why I kind of do, but I don't want to get into all that. But where does the mentality come from, do you think?
Well, there's several different ones. One is, one is simply the ideology or ideology, right? That the federal government shouldn't do anything. Mm-hmm. Right, that it's a states' rights and it's the 10th Amendment and it's all, but the existence of public lands is in the Constitution. It allows the federal government to own lands.
I tried to explain that very thing. I actually had Ammon Bundy, who you might know recently was running for governor.
Yeah, I met him.
I had him on the show, and I argued with him until we were both blue in the teeth about that topic, and he just doesn't get it.
Ammon doesn't argue, though. Ammon talks to you or at you.
Yeah, I know.
Ammon doesn't talk with you.
Yeah.
And that was my experience with him. It's a very little time I've ever exchanged. I met him and his dad. They have a. So theirs is simply but let me tell you, they haven't thought it through because the Bundys would not be grazing the Gold Butte National Monument in the Mojave if the federal government didn't own that land.
Exactly.
I mean, somebody else would come in and they would kill those cows and they would sweep them away back to their 160-acre deeded place. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like Cliven Bundy. I think he's a likable person. Mm-hmm. And he's tough as nails. They're like him and some of those guys with him are great cowboys.
Sure.
But they are simply utterly misguided on this topic. And so the other people that are against this, one, there's people who want to make a boatload of money privatizing public lands in America because they can. And that would be like the American Lands Council, ALC, and that's one of them. There's other people who simply, they have been taught to despise the federal government, and the public lands are owned by the American people and managed by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And so the things that these people dislike include the public lands.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they have a weird way to relate it too. Like one guy was talking. He's a senator here. I won't throw him under the bus right now. I've already done that a million times. But he's a senator from Idaho, and he's talking about, oh well, we have to get rid of these public lands because when your landlord is 2,500 miles away in Washington D.C., that's not how it works. That is not how it works. The federal government is not a landlord. It's not. Idaho is not paying them like you would pay a landlord to have public U.S. Forest Service and BLM.
No, in
land.
fact, the landlord is paying Idaho under payment in lieu of taxes every year.
The PILT payment in Idaho is ridiculously large, and so I don't understand why that this would be under attack. Like what? Let me ask you this. This would be a good question for you, Hal. What happens if the public lands are so-called transferred to the state?
It'll be a sell-off of epic proportions, and here's why. If public land, what the lands we call public, if they made a lot of money, they would have been claimed under private ownership under one of the Homestead Acts that ended in 1976. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason that Nevada is 73% or whatever public land, maybe more than that, is because it's a desert.
Yeah, it's not valuable land.
It's not valuable land. But now, say, like if you're like in Utah, they're selling off all the state lands, the Sitla lands.
Yep.
And people are buying those for these like luxury camping operations and outfitting operations.
Yeah, I know.
And so. But the thing about if you were to transfer federal public lands into state hands, can you imagine the budget that state, the state taxpayer would have to pay enormous amounts of money for the management of land?
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't. You can't, like, there's 8 cows to a section on some BLM lands. That's about the sustainable number,
Mm-hmm.
And you can't pay land taxes on that. And the state can't afford to hold that land and give up payment in lieu of taxes, right?
Exactly.
I mean, this is a debacle waiting to fall upon us.
Well, you're making a great point. There is only one call company here at the Western Huntsman, and that is Phelps Game Calls, born out of hunting and the necessity to make the best calls on the market. Jason Phelps started this company in his garage back in 2009, and now he's got some of the finest lineup of elk calls, turkey calls, predator calls, waterfowl calls available on the market. If you guys go to the website, check it out and get what you need. And if you're in the market, when you go to checkout, use promo code Huntsman10 for 10% off. Whether you're just getting started or have expert level calling skills, check it out at Phelps Game Calls. Get them close. Hoffman Boots is a 4th generation owned boot company, a family of shoemakers based in North Idaho. I've been sporting a pair of Hoffmans for close to a decade, and I really like the Hoffman Explorer in the 8-inch. It's the best boot out there, so check it out at hoffmanboots.com, and you'll see the whole lineup of hunting boots and lineman boots and pack boots and everything else right there on the website. And if you choose to purchase a pair of boots, make sure you use the promo code all caps lock Huntsman10 for 10% off. SKRE Gear, extreme high-performance hunting attire and gear that is scientifically tested, complete layering systems, and some of the finest merino wool products to keep you warm and comfortable, and it's all backed by a great company. What I really like about SKRE is if you go to the website, they have these bundle options like the elk bundle or the whitetail bundle or the turkey bundle, all that stuff that'll get you completely outfitted for your favorite hunt. The starter bundle is a really good deal. Make sure you check that out. They've got the VIP sizing guarantee, and so you can exchange something if it doesn't fit right at absolutely no charge to you. Guys, it's a great warranty, great company, and at checkout, as always, use promo code The Western Huntsman for 15% off and free shipping. The Elk Collective. Folks, the best investment you can make when it comes to hunting is what's between your ears. Having elk knowledge is what separates those who succeed every once in a while versus those who notch a tag every single year. So go to the Elk Collective and sign up. There's over 150 videos in this online course to teach you everything you need to know by some of the best experts to ever enter the elk woods. It's a great program at a great price, guys. And if you use the promo code, the Western Huntsman, you're going to get $20 off of your entire course. So instead of $89, you'll get it for $69. And now that September is over and we're into October and November and all these fall hunts, if you get it now, you're going to have an entire year to go through all this course. And believe me, you're going to need it. There's so much content in there. So check it out and use the promo code, the Western Huntsman, all one word. Last but not least is Tacticam. Guys, you know I've been using Tacticam for a very long time. I really like my Tacticam 5.0s. I like my Tacticam in the wide lens, so you can get that kind of wider angle and shot. They've upgraded now. They've got the Tacticam 6.0, which is super cool. I can't wait to get mine. And also the cell cams. Don't forget about the Tacticam Reveal cell cams. They've got a bunch of different series of these things, and I've got them all over my property, so I know what's going on at all times. Whether I got a bear that's coming after my chickens, or if I have an intruder down at the driveway, or if I have a giant monster whitetail buck over in my hunting spot, I know what is going on at all times. I love my Tacticam Reveals, guys. Check it out at tacticam.com. Let's get back to the show. Here we go. It's not just that we as hunters would lose access, right? It's not just that.
You would definitely lose access, because
we would totally lose access.
Yeah,
but, and that's what I was trying to argue with Ammon Bundy about on my show. Is he's like, oh no, the state would just take it over and manage it, as if it's that simple. And he's going, well, locally we manage the wildlife pretty well, and we can manage the land pretty well. And so and he's promising, oh no, it would stay public. But who pays for that? There isn't money for that. First of all, and second of all, when you're talking about state management, it reminds me of that line in that movie, The Patriot, with Mel Gibson, where he's talking about, I'm paying one tyrant 3,000 miles away, or 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away. Like as if the
That's
state.
a great line.
It is a great line. It's a great line, and it's so true, because the way that states will manage, and especially like somewhere like Idaho, and I don't know how it is in Montana. Montana, I think, has a better system than Idaho does in terms of state managed land. But
there are some big problems right now. But,
is there?
But we have a great history of the DNRC doing the right thing.
Yes, and I know I've heard I think it might have been you he was talking to, Randy Newberg, talk about Montana's state land kind of policies and the access availability to residents and whatnot. But
that was one, though, with a court case in, I think, 1986.
Yeah.
It was not there before.
No.
Again, here's the thing that we should touch on. America is still a place where the future is somewhat up to what you choose as the people. And that court case in Montana that won access to state lands, it was done by, I think it was Rapauli County Fish and Wildlife, a small sportsman's group down in the Bitterroot.
Mm-hmm.
And it would not have happened had these people, a bunch of them that I knew, they're passed on now, God bless him, Harry Lafreniere, was retired military, and the guy could sit, had the patience of like a alligator.
Yeah.
and the ability to do paperwork and stuff, and they just did a hero's job, and it doesn't, none of this, you don't get to hunt if you don't make the choice to protect what you got.
And we're up against so much, so much of my show is driving the passion behind hunting to kind of have people always at the forefront of their mind understand some of the challenges that we're up against. One is public lands, and the other one that we touch on a lot here is the anti-hunting movement. Some of their, whether they're going through commissions or legislative action or whatever, they're trying to get rid of hunting, right? And just taking one bite out of the elephant at a time. It's kind of the same thing with public land. There's these people that they have money and the potential to make a lot of money, that have their hands in this public lands issue, and that is where some of us that don't have millions or billions of dollars can sometimes feel helpless. It's like,
Yeah.
But
we're not helpless because
exactly.
we own it now. And it's it would be like a come and take it, Molon lobby. It's like we own it now, and the only way that it can be taken from us is if somehow we are fooled into giving it up.
Yeah.
Or we lose our fighting urge.
And that's exactly the two Republican. Again, I'm not bashing Republicans, but when Republicans come after my public land, I'm going to bash Republicans. I will go after anybody because that's a priority issue.
I think there's a solution here. I think that we're going to get to a place. I do believe this. We're going to get to a place where the American system of public lands and management and all that is dragged out in front of the two parties, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we are no longer going to, it's not going to be something that like Rob Bishop from Utah can use to make people mad.
Yeah.
It's not something that, some leftist Democrat can say, well, we're not going to, let's just say neither the left or the right is very good on this subject. If we want this, we're going to have to make it a priority to politicians to not mess with it and instead to celebrate it. And let's argue about the management of it, but not the existence.
So how do we do that, Hal? How do we create pain for politicians that are opposed to public land and advocate for politicians, and I don't care if they're left or right, advocate for politicians that are for public land? It's such a tough thing because,
some of those folks are creating a pain for themselves, those politicians now, by embracing like wacko things.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's a wacko idea to transfer the public lands to the states and then sell them off. Like I don't know anybody in the West who hunts and fishes public land or hikes or camps or raises their kids out in the woods, who would support that.
I don't either.
But what it is the politicians support a lot of other things that that person might also be for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've got to do is say, this is the third, what Randy Newberg called it, the third rail. You touch it, you're electrocuted.
Okay.
Like in a subway,
Yep. Oh yeah.
And he says like you keep your hands off the public lands and everybody else, we can vote for politicians who represent our values in some other thing. But this one is unquestioned. We want the freedom to hunt, fish, and roam America's public lands, our dirt, our water. And you don't mess with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a way to get to think about cities like Missoula, Boise, I don't know, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Denver, Colorado, these Western metro areas where there's a lot of people, party affiliation irrelevant, that may not get out and hunt and fish and camp and enjoy, public lands, trap, all the things that we do on our public lands, to make them a little bit more aware and tuned into the idea that this is a beautiful thing that nobody else in the world really has.
They don't. They don't. I have a good friend here who was in like international construction. He worked in embassies. He worked for embassies.
Uh-huh.
And I think he was in, 32 countries or something. He was in Haiti. He was in India for a long time. And he came back home, and he is one of the great speakers, and he's not a talker guy. But he said, I spent all of my career in these countries, somewhere like Estonia.
Yeah.
He talked about how beautiful it was, right? And you could walk along the path and you could go to these mountains and stuff, but like it was not the Bitterroot National Forest. It was not the Ponderay National Forest.
Yeah.
He said there's nothing like this in the whole world. And he actually spoke to Senator Daines' staffer, his natural resources staffer, about this. And I think, and she didn't know what it was all about. And he was like kind of blowing her mind, because here's this guy who's an international construction worker. You know, he loves to hunt, and he's telling her about public lands.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she expected him to be like a right winger or something that doesn't believe in public lands. I don't know what it was. It was a baffling exchange. But he's one of the best. He's one of the most eloquent spokespersons for public lands, given his life experience.
So, and what is this argument? Right wing, public land is not in the Constitution. Like the whole Bundy argument. What?
Yeah.
Where do they get this information? Why are they presenting it like this? Do you know?
Well, okay, I do. So the Bundys use a pocket constitution, which was annotated by a very eccentric person named Cleon Skousen.
Skousen.
And Mr. Skousen, his relatives are still in Utah. He did a little bit of time at the FBI. I think he was a police chief in Salt Lake City for a while. But he fixed the Constitution. And the one that they use doesn't recognize the property clause of the United States Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2.
Yeah.
It has the power, I'm reading this off the internet, it has the power to retain, buy, sell, and regulate federal land.
Yeah.
And I'm in my book.
I read that one. I read that one directly to Ammon Bundy, and he's still like, "Oh no, it's unconstitutional."
Well, it's probably not in his annotated Constitution.
Yeah.
So when I met them when they occupied the Malheur Refuge,
yeah, in
Oregon, I was there, and Ammon would wave this Constitution. All his followers, they wave this little Constitution at you. Anytime you would say anything that they can't really match in an argument, they just wave it.
Yeah.
And it's annotated by Cleon Skousen. It is not the original United States Constitution.
Gotcha.
And so
it's a convenient Constitution.
It's so wild that people just pick whatever they want to believe in a civilized society where you're kind of protected from raiders and wolves, and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sad things about being in a civilized society is that people are protected from the consequences of their own imagination, fantasies, beliefs.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a war, or if you're a Blackfeet raider in 1840, you just simply, there's certain beliefs you just can't have. Like you can't believe that, you can run faster than every other Crow Indian on earth.
Yeah.
You get killed.
Reality catches up with everybody at some point.
It does. And my worry here is that enough people are going to be misinformed about the American public lands for us to make some serious moves and lose the public lands, and that will be an example of reality catching up with us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and that's where that stuff comes from. Are people like the Bundys in Ammon?
Yes.
Ammon, I'm sitting there, I'm telling them about how the state of Idaho is constitutionally required to have the state-owned land generate revenue for school districts and other entities, and he's telling me, no, it's not true. It's really frustrating because it is true. You can't tell me it's not true.
And isn't that awful? Because that's one of the best ideas we ever had.
Right?
You give Section 16 and 36 of every township to the state. And by the way, the feds got this land because we went to war with Mexico,
mm-hmm.
and signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and paid them $15 million in gold.
Yeah.
And if you're into like the nuances of it, we didn't get the Native Americans still had their parts, but we won the war, and we bought the right to attempt to control this land. That's really what it was.
Sure.
And when the U.S. government took over these and created the states under the Enabling Act, they gave them 16 and 36 to remain in state ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to support the schools because the government didn't want everybody to be illiterate.
Yeah. It was a brilliant move, especially for the time.
It was a brilliant move. There's so many brilliant moves that were done in this way. And then what did Nevada do? They sold off all of their state lands.
Yep.
In what's called an orgy of corruption until they only have 3,000 left. And the state of Utah is now selling off their state lands.
Yeah, Utah seems to be a lost cause in a lot of things when it comes to public land, but a lot of
I think politically it is because the people who enjoy these lands are not speaking up.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I mean, and that's my problem as a proud Republican, Hal. Let me put it. I am very conservative. I believe in limited government. I believe in individual liberty and all these things that make up conservatism.
I'm into effective limited government and individual liberty to the max.
But there's a reality of that, and then there is a fantasy of that, and where it gets really messy is when I hear Republicans and conservatives talking about how, the federal government shouldn't be owning all this land. We need to give it back to the states. And it didn't ever belong to the state in the first place, but whatever. The thing that bothers me about that,
it never did.
All the things that the federal government does that chaps my ass, $30 million to study, whatever mosquito's reaction to carbon footprints in Mississippi.
Sure.
Yeah, all these goofy things that we spend money and all these crazy things that are mismanaged, from education to our fiscal budgets to all this stuff. Why in the hell are we focusing on public land? Like the Forest Service is the best thing the federal government does.
It is, and it could be much better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we have, so Dick, here's a thing that happened in the 90s with the spotted owl controversy and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking me where some of this anti-public land stuff comes from. So
yes.
ANILCA in Alaska, the management of federal public lands in Alaska, it was just incredibly controversial, and it turned out good, but people were furious. They threw bombs and rocks, and the same with the spotted owl thing, right? That they were cutting so much timber in the Northwest that the spotted owl was endangered, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all remember it.
Yep.
And then so they had to cut back on it to comply with federal rules that we passed in 1976. I mean, it's so complicated, but it's the way things work. So we passed FLPMA, which was Federal Land Management and Policy and Management Act, in 1976. And that was a huge change on American public lands to recognize public access for one, but also wildlife and fisheries and native plants and all that. And it made the management much more complicated and much more controversial. And that's a place where people started going like, we hate the feds. We hate the feds.
Yeah.
and another thing that happened in there was the environmental movement then, and I consider myself a conservationist to the max, and I believe in laws protecting the environment.
Yeah.
But the environmental movement then saw that you could, say, stop a timber sale because there was a grizzly bear habitat, right?
Yep.
And they began to sue. And one of the things that happened in the 90s was the more green part of America, they started hating the Forest Service. And then the other people that hated having regulations on how many cows they can have or how much timber they could cut, they didn't like the Forest Service. So the Forest Service, which is a noble agency, was getting heat from both sides, and they always do.
Oh, absolutely they do. Yeah. I mean,
so they're kind of like the red-headed stepchild. It's like they can't get a break, BLM either.
Yeah.
And so politicians tend to go like, well, I mean, everybody doesn't like these guys, so I'm not going to fund this. But I don't have to fund the budget for the BLM 100%. Who's going to complain? Everybody hates them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just not
They're
right.
heroes
It's
if they don't.
Yes. And we should be prioritizing the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service funding And we should be bringing the best and brightest, and we do have a lot of the best and brightest in the BLM and the Forest Service now.
Mm-hmm.
But we should have it should go. Nobody goes back anywhere. Everything goes forward. But I believe in the future, if we work this right, that to have a Forest Service job is going to be like an honored part of your community. And it is now, but it could be better. And
could be better,
a BLM range conservationist is going to be like every kid in 6th grade says, man, I'd like to work for the BLM and be a range con out there, riding my horse on the American public lands and making sure that everything is okay and we don't have another dust bowl or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
would like to see these agencies have I just think they could be, we could all agree that if you're going to be conservative and say you want limited government, you're still going to have a government because people demand having a government. They got governments in El Salvador, right?
Well, that's the big, yeah, exactly. That's the big misconception and I think that this has come. A lot of it has come out of both parties seem to have gone more extreme than they used to be. You know what I mean? Like back
Correct.
in the 50s and 60s.
And leaving all us regular people out in the middle.
Exactly. I don't want to be an extremist one way or the other. I can't stand extremism one way or the other, to be honest with you, because that leaves no middle ground. There's got to be gray area because life is just not black and white. It gets messy, things mesh, and things turn gray. So you got to have some common sense with this stuff. And that's what's happened.
I always think about it as having like when you got kids at home, you know?
Uh-huh.
And you got to pay the mortgage, you got to get the groceries, and you got to get the track shoes or the basketball shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you remember Thomas Jefferson said that the American smallholder, like a person who owns their own property and has to farm it or whatever, is the least likely person to fall victim to extremism.
Exactly.
You're just too busy.
And that's the thing is I don't know if maybe the comforts of life in America have created this sense of boredom, and so people need to push things to extreme levels. But
agreed.
What happens is we leave no middle ground for the compromises that need to take place. And so when somebody like me says I believe in limited government, people think that I'm referring to no government. No, it takes. Not everything the federal government does is bad. That's not what my perspective is. I think that there's too much federal government, and it spends way too much money and takes too much of my personal money, for sure. Yep. Absolutely,
agreed.
Hands down. But who in the hell else is going to win World War II next time the Nazi Party comes to taking over all the other countries in Europe? You know, because
and also like who would manage a system of public lands like this?
Yeah,
like that. I always come back to this because if we had no government, you know, there's a record of that too. But even Somalia has a government. It just doesn't do anything for the people.
Yeah. Well, and that's the big idea, the big difference between American government and most other governments throughout the history of the world is our government was designed to serve the people. The people were not designed to serve the government. And that's where we've gotten a little bit out of hand, is I think that both Republicans and Democrats have gotten to a point where they've pushed this extreme idealism as to where the government is the one that has the final say. I'm sorry, you don't. You don't have the final say. So
the people have the final say.
The people have the final say.
And this is an essential American question. It's why we had the movie Public Trust and all. But the question I've always answered, I believe that the system of American public lands are as essential to the democratic republic and our future that we want to live in as anything else in the Constitution or in our American civil rights, that our individual liberties.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the public lands are a cornerstone of the American experiment.
Absolutely. You'd mentioned you had your buddy that traveled the world working in all these construction zones and whatnot, and I have a similar experience. You know, and when you're in the Marines, you have the now you don't get to go to destination places that people think of. I've been to places like Djibouti, Africa,
Yeah.
And all these places they're so obscure nobody knows they even exist. But it sucks. I going there will
I know.
it will always forever and forevermore make me grateful and thank God that I was born as an American, because we have, and a lot of it is because of public land.
Yes, I was driving this morning to go look for some ducks, and I was going up and I was looking at that moon,
Yeah.
And I was just like, I felt like I was the luckiest person on earth. And
that's funny you say that. That is so funny you say that. When I was in other countries overseas, and we're sitting in some shithole of a country and it's midnight and the moon is out, I would look at that moon and I would think,
moon.
Is that the same moon that I would sleep under when I was hunting deer in wherever America? It's that moon relates the entire world to itself, and you can, no matter where you go, it's the same moon. But in parts of this country, in parts of the world that I was in, life was so vastly different than what I was used to. But that moon was the same, and I don't know where I'm maybe I'm trying to get too overly philosophical or poetic or something, but
I don't think so. I think that poetry is part of like hunting and living.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, having the access, people ask me why, like I'm a public lands advocate. I'm writing this book. What in the world? I've been on it 2 years, and it's like,
you have been writing that book a long time, Hal. I'm ready to read it.
I'm working on it. But I do feel to whom much is given, much is expected.
Mm-hmm.
And I have made a life. Elk hunting was what really hooked me. But my kids too. My son killed his first bull last year. My daughter and I were on public land hunting. She wanted a mule. She wanted to find a mule deer. We didn't get one, but we had these epic days in the backcountry. And I just would come back and I would go like, who gets to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And I am not a wealthy man. I can promise you that.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing again, I don't mean to keep bringing up Ammon Bundy, but I was trying to express to him the general public, the general group and makeup of most American hunters are not the kind of people that could spend $30,000 to go hunt an elk. I'm sorry,
no,
it's just not. It's not. I can't do that. I can't do. You can't do. I've had a couple people on the show here that can do that, and I'm not disparaging them for being able to do that. I applaud it. Great. You've been really successful.
I'm glad you got it.
I'm glad you can do that, and I'm glad that there's institutions out there that allow that to happen. And thank God to be an American, because you could pay 20, 30 grand and go hunt whatever the hell you want. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But for the most of us, the people that actually pay into the public land system the most with our heart, souls, blood, sweat, tears, and the wildlife management funding that comes from this thing we do, comes from people who can't afford to do that. And so when you take those lands away and restrict our access, you are taking a part of our life away. You are taking a piece of us away from us, and you don't deserve to do that. And I will fight you tooth and nail to make sure that doesn't happen.
And also, you're fighting for an essential concept of America.
Mm-hmm.
Roosevelt said, if it doesn't work for all of us on some level, it's not going to work for any of us.
Man, that's a great point. I forgot about that quote.
Yeah, one of the things that comes here is like, I don't understand. So I've done a lot of like mountaineering, and I've spent a lot of time. I've spent most of my life outside, even though I'm a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is talk about realities. 23 or 23 below, 30 below, say you're on a long trip and it's 30 below, the reality is really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't have a snow shovel to build a shelter, you're going to suffer. Like it's not, there's no fantasy there. And so I think I'm maybe because of this, I'm more reality based than some people who don't do those kind of things. I'm not being a big head or nothing,
No.
But I don't understand this impulse in America right now to throw bombs and blow stuff up. and burn stuff. Like, why are we talking about getting rid of the public lands? Why wouldn't we go, we are the most powerful, luckiest people in the world, based on extremely difficult decisions and sweat, tears, and blood of our forebears? Why are we talking about tearing it down?
It blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind. And it comes from people that you wouldn't expect it to come from too. That's what also, I would actually expect something like this to come from some left-wing nut job out of San Francisco.
So, Jim, I think someday it will.
I think it will too, because they're going to say, hey, they're not taking public land, leaves these lands exposed to people who are not going to take care of them, and the
also
spotted
they're going to they're also, the left is they're so blinded by like human interest or bleeding heart, whatever.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'm going to go. Why would all that land be out there for wildlife and watersheds when people could be enjoying it?
Yeah.
And buying it and living on it, and I mean, there's a problem with the problem is not going to go away because and I don't want to get too deep into this, but the population is going up very fast.
Yes, it is.
And so this pressure is not going to let off. And I do think that there will be voices from the left that are going to want to be divestiture of public lands, and they're going to be joined by voices of the right. I thought, when the attack on Pittman-Robertson Act came recently?
Yeah, this last summer?
Yes, I thought that was a leftist thing. I thought that was a gun controller
I did too.
deal.
I did too.
Did you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely I did.
I did. It never occurred to me that somebody in the Second Amendment supporting community would attack Pittman-Robertson, one of the most successful conservation funding mechanisms and shooting ranges.
Yeah,
in American history. I thought it was an anti-Second Amendment movement, and I was like, here they are. They're finally showing up. And it turned out from Georgia. It turned out to be a Republican congressman from Georgia, and one of our Montana guys has signed on.
Yeah, it was frustrating to see because I think that people don't understand. I want to sit down and ask him, like, why would you? This is the water that fills the bucket that gives us the weight to hold these things, and come and you want to get rid of that. You want to go to the table with no weight behind what you're saying. That's what you're saying.
To burn something down, which is proven to be indispensable to the future of hunting and shooting in America.
It's insanity. Maybe, Hal, here's what we'll do. You run for president, I'll be your vice president.
Whew, that'd be a rough one, wouldn't it?
You'd want to keep me hidden away, actually. I won't be your vice president. I'll just be your...
They'd have to keep me hidden behind a curtain, too. I have a degree, an undergraduate degree in Latin American studies, and I spent a lot of time in Mexico. Yeah, and I was in Mexico and Brazil and Central America, and I think I got a crash course in how things don't work.
Oh man, totally.
And like the nature of government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what I took away from those years of study and travel. Was like, you're going to have a government. They got governments everywhere. We have a unique ability here to say what that government is going to do. And I believe in the future that the power of the American people is going to say this American system of public land is a perfect function of a functional, rational, limited, and effective government.
Mm-hmm.
And buddy, we're gonna make things happen like you can't believe, like range restoration, like we did in the 1930s after the Dust Bowl, and forestry management for both sustained yields to small mills, not like this global model where you cut all the timber down and sell it to Asia.
Yeah.
We're gonna have an America First model based on public lands and ecosystem services and resilience and beautiful, like Rock Creek in Montana, whose headwaters are protected. That creek is just a powerhouse for people fishing and swimming and living on.
I was going to say, don't even mention that river on this show, man. Like let's keep that one to ourselves, all right?
but it's got so much pressure, but it powers through year after year because its headwaters are protected.
Yep.
Exactly like President Harrison when he wrote the 1891 Forest Reserve Act.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. I mean, this conversation can go on for the next 3 hours if we let it. I know.
Yeah, I want to. Whatever works for your listeners to take away from this, just this remarkable history and this incredible treasure that we have in hand. Mm-hmm.
It really is, and if somebody out there. I think that's part of the problem. It's not that people don't care. There's people out there they don't know to care. It's just like me prior to getting to North Carolina, where there was very limited public land in coastal North Carolina, and my level of frustration was through the roof. I couldn't wait to get back out west because there was nowhere I can go to hunt. And that's what it took for me to realize what the problem is and where the solution is. And so I think that's what it is for those that may not, or I guess unwittingly, unknowingly take advantage of our public land system. You need to know that it is something you got to care about. You've got to care about because this is our life. This is our lifestyle. We don't go. I'll use Idaho again as a great example. For $35, I can go buy an elk tag, and I have millions of acres to go find one in. That is not the case in most of the world. In most of the world, that is not the case. What would you say the American West, the 11 states with the most public land, percentage-wise, takes up land mass-wise? 5%, maybe 1%?
That's a good question. I couldn't answer that one.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I don't know. I'm just kind of doing it off the top of my head. Maybe 1%. And and that is where the magic happens. And obviously, Canada has a lot of public lands as well.
They do, but those are crown lands, and the people do not get a big say in how those are managed. They do not. In Australia, the same.
Yeah, and that's what's sorry, I was drinking water there. That's what's unique about the American system is it's our land. Hal, it's you. Yeah. I had no idea you were such a big landowner, and me too. Like, we own this land. It's not like the federal government. There's some head honcho sitting in Washington, D.C. that owns the deed. That's not how this works. We own the land.
And they can send somebody out there to kick you off of.
Yeah, exactly.
Anytime they want.
And a lot of times you'll hear the argument, well, they can close Forest Service roads. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and one of the great things about that, closing those roads, is you have big game security, and the roads don't erode and fall off in the creek and ruin the water downstream.
Yep. And you can walk in.
And you can walk in, and there is millions of miles of Forest Service roads you can drive around. I worked in forestry stuff, timber and pine cone harvest and tree planting and all that. I mean, I have driven hundreds of thousands of miles of Forest Service road and had a great time doing it.
I love it. I still, to this day, I love it like I'm a teenager. I go cruise the roads for nothing else.
Yeah, me too. Yep. And one of the things I would also throw in here before we quit was the conflict over the management of public lands has caused a lot of people to dislike like people go, why don't y'all just get rid of them? You can't do this, you can't do that. One, that's usually not true. But the conflict is part of the gift. We should be arguing over the management of public lands, and we should always have them to argue over.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to argue sometimes, and you have to argue over them. Nothing. I think of like places with like America again, Canada. The government pretty much decides the management of those lands, and the people just have to live with it. Yeah. Yep. In America, it's of the people, for the people, by the people, and the rabble gets to yell and scream about they get to engage in the conflict over the management. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. as we say, like in my day job, if I get enough contracts coming in and we don't have enough guys to do the work, my boss always says, well, that's a good problem to have. It's the same thing when we have arguments over what and how to manage these public lands. You know what? That's a great problem to have, and it's something I would do enthusiastically. So, when do you expect your book to be available, buddy?
I'm got a publication date of around 2025, but I'm delivering sometime. I'm trying to deliver the bulk this year.
Man,
and I'm over already. I've got caught up in this history, and I don't know. It's a huge project.
I was going to say this must be massive. This must be a massive thing.
But it can't be massive in the end. It has to be more concise. You know?
Gotcha.
So I did make a lot of incredible trips to Utah and to down where the Bundys live in Gold Butte National Monument.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing on that right now. And it was hard to figure out like what to feature as well. Like I did the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming because it was the first national forest in America.
Yeah. Whoop, did I lose you, buddy? Hello?
First trips in the book.
Oh, you cut out there. Sorry about that. You cut out right when you said
I did the Shoshone National Forest.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. But that forest is the restoration of wildlife. I've never seen so many big bulls in my life.
Wow.
And it's no accident.
Yeah, and it's not an accident.
It is not an accident. We chose to set that land aside near Yellowstone. We chose to manage it mostly for wildlife, because it's so high that you couldn't do anything else with it.
Yeah, you couldn't pay me enough money to live in Yellowstone. I got enough snow I'm dealing with, Hal.
It's cold, man.
It is. It's cold. I think we're in for one heck of a winter, too.
I've already got one here. I mean, it's been... the last week the week I went elk hunting, it was 8 below several days running. Woo.
Now that's cold. It
was super cold. It was hard to deal with.
We don't get temperatures like that very often here. Like I think it's probably 28 degrees outside right now, but I've already got 3 feet of snow on the ground, and they're calling for another 6 inches tonight. And so I'm not super happy about that. But I don't know. It is what it is.
It's water for next year.
It is. Hopefully it'll help with some of these fires we've been having lately out here in the West and keep that kind of at bay. But Hal, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. I'm really looking forward to this book. I'd love to get you back on in the future to kind of continue this conversation because I think there's only so much we can cover, especially with my short attention span where I get derailed and go down all sorts of different topics that I didn't
That's part of the fun of it, though. You don't want to get too focused in this life.
That's what's great about doing a podcast is it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So, but
well,
I appreciate you joining me.
I really appreciate you having me. This is a passion of mine. I guess you could tell.
Oh, I can tell. And it sounds like this. I can't wait for the book because you've got the passion, you've got the experience, you've got the time, you're a hell of a writer. I can't wait to get this book in front of me, and I hope a lot of other people get it in front of them as well. Just hopefully.
Well, I'm heading out. I'm working on it as much as I possibly can. I also want to see it behind me, and it's hard to be a writer when you hunt and fish as like I like to.
Tell me about it. No, tell me. I've actually been working on a book for about a year, and I flat out put down the work on it in August, and I haven't touched it since because it's been hunting season. So anyway, it's nothing compared to what you're working on. You're the writer between the two of us, and I can't wait to see it. So I appreciate you joining me.
I appreciate that, man. I'll holler at you when I get closer to the end, and we'll talk.
Yeah, let's do it. And then when it's ready to release, let's get you back on the show. And
sounds good, man.
We'll get it in front of as many people as we can, brother.
All right, that sounds great.
All right, Hal, until next time, I really appreciate it again. That was a great conversation.
Same, Jim. Thank you.
You made it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you're following us on Instagram at The Western Huntsman and write us a good review at Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.